The Galactic Concord had existed for over 300 years, a fragile alliance of more than 200 alien species spread across the spiral arms of the galaxy. Its seat of power was Xylos Prime, a massive orbital station built around a dead moon, where diplomats in shimmering robes and armored envoys debated trade routes, border disputes, and the occasional rogue AI. For most of its history, the Concord had operated smoothly, through threats, bribes, and the quiet understanding that no single species should ever grow too strong. But now, panic was spreading through its polished corridors like a virus. It began with a message, short, direct, uncompromising. Earth had refused to negotiate. The emergency session had been called just hours after the human response arrived. Delegates from the Velnari, tall and silver-eyed, stood rigid near the central dais. The Karathi, insectoid and sharp-featured, clicked their mandibles in agitation. Even the usually calm Silthians with their flowing bioluminescent skin shifted uneasily in their hover seats. At the center of it all stood Speaker Zorvak, a Velnari elder whose voice rarely rose above a whisper. But when it did, galaxies listened. "The humans have ignored our ultimatum," Zorvak said, his words echoing through the chamber. "They have not requested clarification. They have not offered counterterms. They have simply declined." A murmur rippled through the assembly. No species in conquered history had ever done that, not once. Even the warlike Dravik had sent negotiators after their moon was blockaded. The hive-minded Quor had surrendered their entire fleet rather than face total isolation. But humans, newcomers to interstellar politics, barely a century into spaceflight, had said no without blinking. On Earth, far below the stars, President Daniel Carter sat in a dimly lit room deep inside Cheyenne Mountain. The air smelled of coffee and ozone. Around him, his closest advisors watched a live feed from Xylos Prime, their faces tense. General Lisa Monroe stood near the wall, arms crossed, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. Ambassador Paul Green sat at the table, fingers steepled, eyes fixed on the screen. "They're panicking," Green said quietly. "They expected us to beg." Carter didn't answer right away. He stared at the image of Zorvak, who was now addressing a group of Karathi delegates in hushed, urgent tones. For years, Earth had played by the Concord's rules. They paid docking fees at neutral ports. They accepted trade tariffs. They even handed over 3 captured alien smugglers without protest. But this was different. The Concord had demanded Earth dismantle its new defense grid along the Orion Arm. Built over 5 years using salvaged tech and homegrown innovation, the grid wasn't a weapon. It was a shield, a network of sensor buoys, drone patrols, and energy dampeners designed to detect and neutralize threats before they reached human colonies. The Concord called it provocative. Carter called it necessary. After the Titan colony incident, when a Karathi patrol opened fire on a civilian freighter that drifted too close to their border, humanity had learned a hard lesson. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. "We gave them our answer," Carter finally said. His voice was calm but firm. "No negotiations under threat." "That's not how we do things," Monroe nodded. "They'll try sanctions first. Cut off our access to the Helix exchange, freeze our credits, maybe even block our ships from neutral ports." "Let them," Green replied. "We've been stockpiling for months. Food, fuel, medical supplies, and our own comms network is fully independent now. They can't silence us." Carter leaned back in his chair. He thought of his daughter, asleep in her room back in Colorado. He thought of the engineers on Mars who'd worked 16-hour shifts to finish the last relay node. He thought of the millions of people who just wanted to live without looking over their shoulders. "We didn't ask for this," he said, "but we won't back down." Back on Xylos Prime, the panic deepened. A young Silthian delegate named Tira watched the human transmission replay for the 10th time. She had studied Earth's history, its wars, its art, its sudden leaps in science after first contact. Humans were chaotic, yes, emotional. But they were also stubborn in a way no other species understood. They didn't just survive hardship, they used it as fuel. "They're not bluffing," she whispered to her aide. Nearby, a Karathi strategist named Vexil scoffed. "They have no fleet to speak of. No allies, they're isolated. One show of force and they'll fold." But Tira wasn't so sure. Something in the human message felt final, not angry, not desperate. Just done. Meanwhile, on Earth, the news of the Concord's ultimatum hadn't even made the front page. Most people were watching a baseball game or arguing about school budgets. Life went on. Factories kept running. Ships kept launching. The defense grid hummed quietly in the void, invisible and ready. Carter stood and walked to the windowless wall of the command room. There was no view, only reinforced steel. But he didn't need one. He could feel the weight of what they'd done. They had drawn a line. And now, the galaxy would see whether humanity was willing to stand behind it. In orbit above Earth, a small patrol vessel named the Dawn Chaser adjusted its course. Its captain, a woman named Elena Ruiz, checked her sensors. All clear. She sipped her coffee and glanced at the stars. She didn't know about the panic on Xylos Prime. She didn't care. Her job was simple. Watch the dark and keep her people safe. That was enough. And as the first sanctions began to roll in, trade routes closed, data streams severed, human credits frozen. Earth didn't flinch. No emergency broadcasts, no angry speeches. Just silence. A calm, steady refusal to play a game they never agreed to join. The conquered had expected fear. Instead, they got resolve. And that was far more terrifying. The silence from Earth was louder than any war cry. Weeks passed after the human refusal, and the galactic conquered grew more uneasy with each passing day. Sanctions had been imposed, trade halted, data links severed, human ships turned away from neutral ports, but Earth gave no response. No protests, no pleas, no angry broadcasts. Their news channels still showed cooking shows, weather forecasts, and children's school plays. Their social feeds buzzed with jokes, music, and photos of sunsets. It was as if the galaxy's threats meant nothing at all. On Xylos Prime, the panic turned into confusion. The Velnari demanded answers. The Karathi called for stronger action. But even their own spies found nothing unusual on Earth. Factories operated at normal capacity. Power grids ran steady. Spaceports launched routine supply runs to Mars and the Jovian stations. There were no secret fleet buildups, no hidden weapons labs, no mass evacuations. Just life. Ordinary, stubborn human life. Karathi strategist Vexel paced the war room aboard his flagship, claws tapping against the metal floor. They are hiding something, he insisted to his second-in-command. No species ignores a conquered ultimatum without a plan, but scans showed no hidden fleets, no energy surges, no encrypted military chatter. Earth's comms were open, almost boringly so. A farmer in Nebraska was arguing with his neighbor about fence lines. A teacher in Lagos was uploading math lessons. A dock worker in Sydney was complaining about overtime. It made no sense. Meanwhile, young Silthian delegate Tira studied human behavior with growing fascination. She had pulled up old Earth archives, videos of protests, speeches, even reality television. Humans were emotional, yes, but they also valued dignity. They didn't like being pushed around. And when cornered, they didn't always fight back with weapons. Sometimes they just stopped playing. They're not reacting because they don't see us as equals in this conversation, she told her mentor. To them, it's not diplomacy, it's bullying. Her mentor scoffed.
Bullying?
The conquered maintains galactic peace. A peace for who? Tira asked quietly. Back on Earth, President Daniel Carter walked through a quiet park near Denver. Autumn leaves crunched under his shoes. He wasn't surrounded by guards, just two agents a respectful distance behind. He needed to think. The silent strategy was working, but it wouldn't last forever. The Concord would grow impatient. And when they did, they would act. In Cheyenne Mountain, General Lisa Monroe oversaw a series of covert drills. Not with ships or missiles, but with simulations. Scenarios where Karathi cruisers jumped near Proxima, where Velnari hackers tried to breach Earth's networks, where supply lines were cut for months. Every drill ended the same way. Humanity held. Not because they were stronger, but because they were ready to endure. Ambassador Paul Green, meanwhile, had quietly recalled all non-essential staff from Earth's few off-world outposts. The embassy on Xylos Prime was now staffed by just 3 people, a skeleton crew ready to leave at a moment's notice. Green himself remained on Earth, coordinating with neutral traders who still dealt with humans through back channels. Food, medicine, spare parts, they were stockpiled but not hoarded. Life went on, just a little quieter. One evening, Carter gave a short address from the White House lawn. No podium, no dramatic lighting, just him, a microphone, and the night sky behind him. We built our future with our own hands, he said, voice steady. We won't hand it over because someone demands it. The speech lasted less than 2 minutes. It was broadcast on every human channel and uploaded to public data hubs across known space. Within hours, it was being analyzed by every intelligence agency in the Concord. Some called it arrogance. Others called it courage. Most just found it strange. Why say so little? Why show no fear? On a remote asteroid mining station near Ceres, engineer Marcus Boyd watched the speech with his crew. They were used to hard work and harder choices. When the Concord sanctions hit, their supply shipments slowed, but they adapted. They recycled more, repaired old gear, shared rations without complaint. They think we'll crack under pressure, Marcus said, wiping grease from his hands. But we've been hungry before. We've been scared before. We know how to wait, his crew nodded. They didn't need speeches. They just needed purpose. Back on Xylos Prime, the silence from Earth began to eat at the delegates. The Karathi started whispering about psychological warfare. The Velnari accused humans of deception. Even species that had never cared about Earth now watched closely, wondering if this small, young civilization might actually change the rules of the galaxy. Tira sat alone in her quarters, reviewing footage of Earth cities at night, lights glowing like stars on the ground. She thought about how humans named their ships: Horizon, Steadfast, New Dawn. Not weapons, not conquerors, explorers. They're not trying to win a war, she murmured. They're trying to avoid one. But the Concord didn't understand that kind of strength. To them, power meant fleets and treaties and the ability to make others obey. Earth's power was quieter. It was in the farmer who kept planting crops even when trade stopped. It was in the teacher who kept teaching even when the galaxy turned its back. It was in the simple act of refusing to be afraid. General Monroe met with Carter in a secure bunker beneath Colorado Springs. Maps of the solar system glowed on the walls. Red markers showed potential threat zones. Blue markers showed human assets. They'll make a move soon, Monroe said. They can't afford to look weak, Carter nodded. Let them. When they strike, they'll find we're not what they expected. Monroe smiled faintly. They think silence means weakness. They're about to learn it means readiness. Above them, in near-Earth orbit, the defense grid hummed softly. Sensors scanned the void. Drones drifted in perfect formation. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was rushed. Everything had a purpose, and still Earth said nothing. No demands. No threats. No begging. Just quiet resolve, stretching across the stars like a line drawn in stone. The Conquered had expected panic. Instead, they got patience, and patience, they were beginning to realize, could be far more dangerous than any weapon. Frustration finally boiled over in the Galactic Concord. Weeks of silence from Earth had done nothing but make the Alliance look weak. Hardliners, especially among the Karathi and a faction of Velnari elders, argued that words had failed. Only action would force humanity to listen. A secret vote was held, not by the full council, too many soft voices there, but by a coalition of military-aligned delegates. They approved a demonstration strike, not an invasion, not total war, just a sharp, clean blow to show Earth that defiance had consequences. Their target, Relay Station Theta 7, a small human comms outpost near Proxima Centauri, remote, unarmed, mostly automated, perfect for sending a message without bloodshed. The Karathi cruiser. Iron Mandible led the mission, flanked by 2 Velnari support ships. Their orders were clear. Disable the station's core transmitter, broadcast a warning across all human channels, and withdraw before Earth could respond. It would be over in minutes. As the small fleet dropped out of warp near Theta 7, the Karathi captain, Vraktol, felt a rare flicker of satisfaction. Finally, action. No more waiting, no more human silence. He ordered weapons charged, but set to non-lethal disruption pulses. They wanted to scare, not slaughter. But as the Iron Mandible closed in, something felt wrong. The station's lights were off. No active power signatures, no distress calls, no drone patrols. Just cold metal floating in the void. Scan for life signs, Vraktol ordered. None detected, came the reply. He frowned. Too easy. But orders were orders. He gave the command to fire. The moment the first energy pulse left the cruiser's cannons, the station exploded. Not with fire, but with a cloud of silver mist. Nanotech mines, dormant until triggered by weapon signatures, burst from hidden compartments and swarmed the Karathi ship. Within seconds, they coated the hull, eating through sensor arrays and engine shielding like acid through paper. Alarms blared across the bridge. Before Vractol could react, a second surprise hit. From a distortion in space barely larger than a shuttle, a human vessel emerged. Sleek, dark, and utterly silent. No running lights, no ID beacon, just smooth lines and sharp angles. It fired no weapons, only focused electromagnetic pulses, tuned to disable ship systems without harming organic life. The two Velnari escorts went dark instantly, their crews unharmed but helpless. The iron mandible struggled, its engines sputtering, its weapons offline. On the human ship, Captain Elena Ruiz watched the chaos unfold on her screen. She had been waiting in a micro-wormhole pocket for exactly this moment. Earth's scientists had perfected short-range quantum folds years ago, but kept them secret. Now they were useful. "Send the message," she said calmly. A single transmission pulsed from her ship, beamed directly into the Karathi cruiser's comms array. Not a threat, not a boast. Just a recording of President Carter's voice, the same words he'd spoken weeks before. "We built our future with our own hands. We won't hand it over because someone demands it." Then, the human ship vanished as quietly as it appeared. Back on the crippled Karathi vessel, Vractol stared at his dead controls. Shame burned in his chest. They had been outthought, outweighted, and outmaneuvered without a single shot fired at a living being. The humans hadn't even tried to destroy them. They had simply shown they could. News of the failed strike spread faster than any weapon. Within hours, every major species in the Concord knew. Earth had anticipated the attack, turned their own trap against them, and walked away without violence. On Xylos Prime, panic returned, but this time, it was mixed with fear. Speaker Zorvak demanded a full investigation. The Karathi High Command disavowed the mission, blaming rogue elements. But everyone knew the truth. The Concord had blinked first, and humanity hadn't even needed to raise a fist. Tira, the young Silthian delegate, watched the sensor logs from Theta 7 in stunned silence. The human ship had used tech the Concord didn't even know existed. More than that, it had shown restraint. They could have destroyed the Karathi cruiser. They chose not to. "That's not aggression," she whispered. "That's discipline." Her mentor, once dismissive, now looked uneasy. They're playing a different game. Back on Earth, there was no celebration. No victory parades. Just quiet acknowledgement and secure briefings. General Lisa Monroe reviewed the mission logs with approval. "They learned we don't bluff," she told Carter. Carter nodded. "Now they'll think twice before testing us again." But he knew this wasn't over. The hardliners would be furious. Some might call for real war. Others might finally see reason. Either way, Earth had drawn a new line. Attack us and you'll find we're ready. Not just to fight, but to win without becoming monsters. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. Minor species, those long ignored by the Concord, began reaching out to Earth. A trader from the Helix Rim sent a coded message offering spare parts. A scientist from the Glimmer Collective asked for data on human energy shielding. Even a former Concord observer, now representing a breakaway colony, requested a private channel with Ambassador Paul Green. They weren't allies yet, but they were watching, and they liked what they saw. On Mars, engineers worked through the night to upgrade the next phase of the defense grid. On Luna, diplomats drafted new protocols for independent comms. In Earth's oceans and cities, life continued as usual because the people knew their leaders had protected their peace without sacrificing their principles. Captain Elena Ruiz returned to dock at the hidden shipyard near Titan. Her crew was tired but proud. They hadn't fired a single lethal round. They hadn't lost a single soul. And they had made the galaxy understand one simple truth. Humans would defend themselves, but they would not become what they fought against. The Karathi cruiser, now adrift, was eventually towed back to Concord space by a neutral salvage team. Its crew was unharmed. Its systems were restored within weeks. But the story of their humiliation spread far and wide. For the first time, species across the galaxy began to wonder. Maybe humanity wasn't the threat. Maybe the real danger was a Concord that demanded obedience without offering respect. And as Earth remained silent once more, not out of fear, but out of certainty, the galaxy started to listen. After the failed strike near Proxima Centauri, the galaxy held its breath. The Concord was fractured, its authority shaken. But Earth did not press its advantage with threats or demands. Instead, it did something no one expected. One morning, without warning, a data packet appeared on every public and private network across KN own space. It carried no encryption, no password, just a title, The Human Doctrine. Ambassador Paul Green had spent weeks helping draft it. President Daniel Carter had approved every word. General Lisa Monroe had ensured the technical sections were accurate but not revealing. The document was not a declaration of war. It was not a plea for peace. It was simply a statement of who humans were and what they believed. It began with 3 core principles. First, every species had the right to govern itself without outside control. Second, defense was not aggression. Building shields did not mean planning to attack. Third, cooperation must be voluntary, not forced through fear or sanctions. Then came the real surprise. Attached to the doctrine were open-source schematics, not for weapons, but for the very defense grid the conquered had feared. Detailed diagrams of sensor arrays, energy dampeners, drone coordination protocols, and early warning systems. All of it freely shared. And at the end, a simple message. We built this to protect our homes. If you seek safety, not dominance, we are willing to share what we've learned. The galaxy was stunned. For centuries, advanced technology had been hoarded, traded only for favors or credits. Species guarded their secrets like treasure. But Earth had just given away its most valuable shield to everyone. On Xylos Prime, Speaker Zorvac called the move reckless propaganda. But even he couldn't deny the impact. Within hours, dozens of minor species downloaded the files. Engineers on fringe worlds began running simulations. Some found the designs crude by conquered standards, but adaptable, practical, built for real-world use, not show. Tira, the young Silthian delegate, studied the schematics with growing admiration. The human grid wasn't about overpowering enemies. It was about early detection, minimal force, and layered redundancy. It assumed failure was possible and planned for it. That kind of humility was rare in galactic engineering. She sent a private message to Earth's public diplomatic channel. Not through official conquered lines, but through a neutral data hub. "Thank you," she wrote. "This changes everything." She didn't expect a reply. But one came the next day. Just 2 words. "You're welcome." Meanwhile, trade began to shift. Species that had once obeyed the conquered sanctions now quietly reopened channels with Earth. A grain freighter from the Helix Rim docked at Mars orbital, carrying protein-rich algae in exchange for human solar regulators. A medical consortium from the Glimmer Belt requested licenses to produce Earth-designed air filters for their polluted colonies. Even a former Karathi scientist disillusioned with his government reached out to collaborate on atmospheric recycling tech. Earth didn't refuse. It didn't gloat. It simply said yes on equal terms. Back on Earth, life remained steady. Factories hummed. Schools opened. Farmers harvested crops under open skies. The people didn't see themselves as heroes or rebels. They were just living, working, and protecting what was theirs. President Carter gave no grand speech about the doctrine. He didn't need to. The message spoke for itself. In a small briefing with his team, he said only, "We're not trying to lead the galaxy. We just want a seat at the table without kneeling first." General Monroe oversaw the next phase of readiness. With new allies emerging, joint drills were proposed, not as military alliances, but as mutual safety exercises. A Silthian scout ship practiced sensor coordination with a human patrol near the asteroid belt. A Glimmer freighter tested emergency docking protocols with Luna Station. Each interaction was small, but each built trust. Ambassador Green worked tirelessly, not from a grand embassy, but from a modest office in Geneva. He answered every message, reviewed every proposal, and treated every species, no matter how small, with the same respect. He knew the real battle wasn't in space. It was in perception. And slowly, humanity's image was changing, from reckless upstarts to steady partners, from threats to neighbors. On Xylos Prime, the old guard resisted. The Karathi demanded the doctrine be declared illegal. The Velnari called it a trick, but their voices were losing power. Too many species had already benefited from Earth's openness. Too many saw a better way. Even some conquered members began to question the old rules. Why should trade be controlled by a few? Why should defense be seen as aggression? Why should new voices be silenced just because they didn't follow tradition? Tira stood before the full assembly one evening, her bioluminescent skin glowing softly. "We feared humanity because they were different," she said. "But difference is not danger. It is possibility." No one clapped, but no one shouted her down either. That in itself was progress. Back on Earth, a young engineer named Marcus Boyd, now working on a joint project with Silthian designers, tested a new relay node. It combined human durability with Silthian energy efficiency. It worked on the first try. He smiled and sent the results to both teams. In orbit, Captain Elena Ruiz led a patrol near the edge of human space. This time she wasn't alone. A small Silthian scout ship flew in loose formation beside her. No weapons charged, no tension. Just two ships watching the dark together. The human doctrine had done what threats never could. It had turned fear into curiosity, suspicion into cooperation, and isolation into connection. And Earth still hadn't fired a single shot in anger. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest strength wasn't its tech, its ships, or even its courage. It was its willingness to share, not to conquer, not to control, but to build something better, together. 6 months after the human doctrine was released, the galaxy looked different. The panic that once gripped the galactic concord had faded, replaced by a quiet uncertainty, and for many, hope. The old order was not gone, but it was changing. And at the center of that change stood Earth, not as a conqueror, but as a quiet example. The new council session was not held on Xylos Prime. It was held on Luna, in a newly built amphitheater overlooking the Sea of Serenity. Human engineers had constructed it in just 90 days, using local materials and open designs shared by a dozen species. The dome was transparent, showing the stars above and Earth hanging in the blackness like a blue jewel. It was a symbol, not of human dominance but of shared space. President Daniel Carter walked into the chamber without fanfare. He wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no armor. Around him, delegates from over 100 species gathered, not just the old Concord powers, but representatives from colonies, trade guilds, and independent systems that had never been invited before. Some wore robes, some wore exosuits, some communicated through light pulses or scent signals. All watched Carter as he took his place at the human delegation table. Speaker Zorvac was there too, though his title now meant less than it once did. He sat stiffly, surrounded by fewer allies than before. The Karathi had withdrawn most of their delegates after the failed strike. The Velnari were divided, but they came anyway because not coming would mean admitting irrelevance. Carter stood when it was his turn to speak. He did not use a podium. He did not raise his voice. "We didn't come here to replace the Concord," he said. "We came to ask for something simpler. Fairness. A system where no species has to beg for the right to protect its people. Where cooperation is chosen, not forced. Where silence isn't seen as weakness, but as the space between words where trust can grow." He paused, looking not at the powerful, but at the smaller delegations, the ones from dusty mining worlds and ocean colonies, the ones who had never had a real voice. "We offer no ultimatums," he continued, "only an invitation. To build a new charter, one that respects sovereignty, encourages sharing, and judges actions, not species." Then he sat down. No applause followed. But something deeper happened. One by one, delegates from the fringe world stood, not to cheer but to signal agreement. A glimmer scientist raised a 3-fingered hand. A helix trader tapped her chest in the traditional sign of honor. Tira of the Silthians glowed a soft gold, a rare display of approval. Even Zorvac remained silent. He had expected defiance. He got dignity instead. And dignity was harder to argue with. After the session, Ambassador Paul Green walked with Tira along a quiet corridor lined with earth plants, wheat, lavender, and young oak saplings grown in lunar soil. "You changed everything without firing a shot," she said. Green shook his head. "We didn't change anything. We just refused to play a game that was rigged from the start. The rest, and that was up to you," she smiled. Maybe the galaxy was ready for a new kind of strength. Back on Earth, General Lisa Monroe stood on a hill in Colorado, watching a cargo shuttle lift off toward Mars. It carried medical supplies, textbooks, and a team of engineers heading to help upgrade a Silthian water purifier. There were no soldiers on board, no weapons, just people helping people. She thought of the drills she once ran in secret bunkers. Now those same skills were used to train joint response teams, Human, Silthian, Glimmer, even a few reformed Karathi technicians who had defected after the strike. Defense wasn't about walls anymore. It was about networks, trust, shared warning systems. In orbit, Captain Elena Ruiz guided her ship through a routine patrol near the edge of the solar system. Beside her flew a small fleet, not human, but a mix of allied vessels, each flying their own colors but moving as one. They weren't hunting enemies. They were mapping debris fields, rescuing stranded freighters, and testing new comms protocols. Peace, she realized, wasn't the absence of war. It was the presence of cooperation. On Mars, Marcus Boyd finished installing the last relay node of the expanded grid. This one linked directly to a Silthian early warning station near Alpha Centauri. When he powered it on, a soft chime echoed through his helmet. Connection established. He looked up at the stars and thought of his grandfather who had worked on the first radio telescopes. "We're still listening," he whispered. "But now we're also being heard." The old Concord did not vanish overnight. Some species still clung to control. Some still whispered about human ambition. But their influence shrank with every new alliance, every shared project, every child on a distant world who learned about Earth not as a threat, but as a partner. And Earth itself, it kept moving forward. Factories built not just for war, but for healing. Schools taught not just history, but empathy. Ships launched not to conquer, but to connect. President Carter returned home after the Luna session. He kissed his daughter goodnight, then stood on his porch looking at the same stars that watched over 1,000 worlds. He felt no triumph, only responsibility. They had won nothing by force. They had earned respect by standing firm, and by offering a hand instead of a fist. Above him, a human freighter passed silently through the upper atmosphere, its cargo hold full of seeds, medicine, and blueprints for clean energy. It was headed to a colony that had once feared Earth. Now, they waited with open docks. The panic that once consumed the galaxy was gone. In its place was something fragile, precious and new, understanding. And for the first time in a long time, the stars felt a little less lonely.